Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyourear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Dave, we're recording this on Saturday, the 23rd of November. What were you doing 40 years ago in 2 days' time, i.e. November the 25th, 1984?
I think I was doing the same thing as you were. I was attending Sarm West Studios, as I think it was called in those days, in Notting Hill, with a whistle test film crew to capture whatever happened when Bob Geldof was supposed to be making his much talked about charity record, which frankly we rather approached with with some apprehension, didn't we? Really, because
I'm ashamed of this now. I got a call. I think it might have been from Mariella Frostrup, the now very well-known broadcaster. I think was doing the publicity for it at Phonogram Records, and I think she rang me up and said, "Look, Bob Geldof's organising a charity record." I remember the general mood in the Smash Hits office was just one of sort of shrugging disbelief. That's awful, isn't it? Because we tended to calibrate everybody by their kind of star status, if you like, and the Boomtown Rats had not had a hit for 4 count 'em long years.
That was a long time.
Banana Republic had been their last hit record. And we kind of felt that they were kind of a bit dead in the water, really. And so, disgracefully, I couldn't see the value of Bob doing it. One of the things that struck me soon after was that if it had been somebody really currently successful, I think people would have had a problem with identifying with them. Because, let's say, for example, Bono was the person who decided to organise this charity single. But U2 were big and they were becoming huge. People would have immediately thought, well, what do I feel about Bono's music? What do I want to be associated with something to do with U2? It was very divisive. There's nothing divisive about Bob Geldof. He was just Bob Geldof then, was he? He didn't represent the Boomtown Rats. He was just a guy that everybody knew. He was very persuasive. So that was a good thing.
Now, I remember the producer, Whistletest, looking at me like, Bob Geldof's making a charity record. And there was an eye roll in the way, this was expressed to me. And so I think I may have actually said, is anybody going to turn up? But anyway, I turned up there on the Sunday morning and you were there as well.
I was there with Smash Hits. That's right.
And
we were the only people there. It was us, Smash Hits, Neil from the Young Ones, wasn't it? Doing a thing for the Tube. And I think Robin Egger for the Daily Mirror. We were the only journalists allowed in.
And I think when I got there, I think the first person I saw was Sting. And I thought, oh, okay. And then the second person I saw was Paul Weller, and I thought, oh, okay. And then Spandau Ballet pulled up, and then they just kept pouring in, more and more until it got the stage where you just didn't take any notice, really. And until there you were surrounded by, it was almost like you were putting together an ideal edition of the Smash Hits yearbook, and you're having one of those fantasy features in which all your pop pals, you know what I mean, got into a room and had a party or did conjuring tricks or
whatever.
It's
like one of our cartoons we used to do, wasn't it?
It really was.
The ideal pop party and everyone was there.
It really was like really that. Were. And you just couldn't believe it. And no, because I spoke to Bob Geldof a couple of weeks ago for the Radio Times. And, because this documentary about the events that day has been put together from footage that has been sitting in the cupboard, Get Back style, for kind of 40 years. Nobody knew it was there, like the old lady locked in the lavatory. And it is really interesting because it kind of starts with a shot of Geldof in mid-yaw standing there like nervous students who've invited a load of people to a party. You know that feeling of anxiety? I still get that. Not that I throw many parties, but if I did throw a party, I would still go through that agony 10 minutes before anybody. Is anybody going to turn up? Please,
You're putting out your saucers full of peanuts.
Absolutely. That's why I always take the view going to a party with my wife, say, we can't go now, it's too early. I said, they always like somebody going early. If you're throwing a party, you want somebody to turn up as early as possible. Don't you?
Yeah.
That's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, there's Geldof and Midgeur, in the kitchen of the party, supposedly, rather nervously thinking about who might turn up. And Midge had said to Bob Geldof, who's going to turn up? And he said, oh, absolutely everybody. Because he didn't know absolutely everybody was going to turn up. But, people might have found excuses on the day, but they didn't. They absolutely turned up. And the weird thing, the interesting thing, talking to Geldof about it, is that none of this would have happened had his erstwhile pop career not been so far down the dumper, as you've said, at that particular point, because the Boomtown Rats had, I can't remember what was their latest record. They'd had an album out that year, which had not even gone in the chart. It hadn't even touched the top 50, which is pretty amazing when you consider how big they'd been a few years before.
And they'd had a record out 2 weeks before, hadn't they? And that was the day he discovered how badly that record was doing.
Well, he had a single called Dave, which had really good reviews. And he thought, oh, this is the one. This is the one that's going to take us back. And he'd gone into Phonogram and met the radio people who pretty much said, nobody in radio will touch this with a barge pole. They're not having it at all. And that's because, as he said, the world had moved on. And suddenly, it's 1984, it's Duran Duran, it's Spandau Ballet, it's Boy George, it's Wham. It's a different world, And it's quite interesting. I hadn't realized this until he pointed this out. They were a 70s act, the Boomtown Rats, really, you know what I mean? And whereas the 80s felt bright, shiny, and new,
completely different.
And so
he was really young.
He trudged home early. He had nothing to do, no gigs to go to, no interviews to attend or radio stations or whatever. And it was only by going home that he sat on the sofa and happened to see Michael Burke's report from Coram in Tigray in Ethiopia. It was about an 8-minute item or something like that in the middle of the news, which is pretty unthinkable nowadays.
Yeah.
And was horrified, obviously, and galvanized into doing something about it in whatever way he could. Largely because he had a diary with wide open spaces.
Yeah, he had all the time in the world. Everyone else was incredibly busy, but he could really just and that became his job instantly.
Absolutely.
He was back at Phonogram, wasn't he? Borrowing their offices, borrowing their landlines, trying to scare it all up.
They also had a technological marvel called a fax.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that's most amazing to me when I think back on Live Aid and Band Aid and so forth, is these things were accomplished without a mobile phone. Which is just,
I know.
You can't imagine doing anything nowadays without a mobile phone.
Which is why it was a surprise that those people turned up, because otherwise he would have known beforehand whether they were or weren't coming.
Absolutely.
But there was that. You and I were both there, just seeing people come through the door, which I can really remember. I remember Duran Duran arriving in limos. I remember thinking limos was a strange way to arrive for a charity fundraising. Yes. But there we are, wearing ski goggles. I remember Bono coming. I remember Sting driving himself there in a black Range Rover with his new wife Trudy Styler and a little son. I think it was Joe. I suppose it would have been. I can just remember them coming in one by one. And the other thing I remember now, which does seem ridiculous, but it's worth mentioning, is the age divide. Maybe I was looking at it with my Smash Hits hat on, but you felt at the time that Gary Kemp was 25, Bananarama 26, John Moss 27. You felt they were the young ones, George Michael, and that the old guard were Phil Collins, who was 33.
Yes,
Very major Sting. And Francis Rossi, the oldest person there, was 35. I remember looking at it and thinking, it's absolutely extraordinary that these old codgers are here and that the young guard are having to kind of associate with them. Now, Ed Sheeran today is 33. Taylor Swift is 34. Taylor Swift is older now than Phil Collins was at Band Aid. And yet you look back at that and just think, what a knackered old, creaky old pensioner he was. It's extraordinary. And there was a big moment, which I remember telling you about, when John Moss kind of broke the ice and ran across the room when he saw Phil Collins, threw his arms around him and hugged him and said, "My hero." It was suddenly all right for the young people to talk to the old people. It was just bizarre.
Yeah. I suppose, Phil Collins at that point it was Genesis Phil Collins, wasn't it? Rather than Phil Collins, the solo artist. And so
well,
forth.
no, because surely In the Air Tonight, wasn't that a big hit in about 81? I would have thought.
Oh, was it? Okay.
I think it was. I think he had a career, but he was still thought of as being old guard, kind of ex-hippie.
Yeah.
So it was different, really.
One of the other things that struck me talking to Geldof about it was that these were the kind of what were to prove to be the last days of mass media, where you had very few television channels and very little radio, certainly compared to nowadays, and obviously no social media. And so you could galvanize a country like the UK by getting the cooperation of about 4 people.
Yeah, Daily Mirror, the BBC, Radio 1.
The musicians union, the bosses of the record companies, you got the bosses of the record companies to, donate, pressing and so forth. And the music papers donated free advertising space. And, he did a deal with Maxwell and the Mirror to give the Mirror the exclusive on it. But the most amazing thing to me was that, when they made the record on the Sunday, so they were mixing it overnight on a Sunday and then kind of getting it at the shops, I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. And so obviously you approach Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops is coming out Thursday. So in those days, even then, there were probably 14, 15 million people watching Top of the Pops. So will you play this record, this video? And they said no, because it's not in the chart. Because we have rules. We don't play anything that's not in the chart. And so Geldof got on to Michael Grade, who was the boss of BBC One at the time, and said, can't you do something about this? He said, no, I can't interfere with the rules.
No, rules.
Which is kind of quite endearing, really, because that's the old BBC way, you know what I mean? That we don't interfere with programs. They do things the way they do them. And I think that's good in lots of ways. But anyway, he thought for a minute. He said, I'll tell you what, if I give you a program just before Top of the Pops. Now, the idea that you could clear 5 minutes in the schedule on a Thursday evening between EastEnders and Top of the Pops, or whatever it would be at the time, is absolutely astonishing.
Really impressive, actually.
And he said, can you get somebody to introduce it? And Geldof said, well, I could fucking do it. And Michael Gregg goes, could you get somebody else?
Get somebody famous?
Could you? So you got David Bowie
down the dumper.
Yes. So you got David Bowie instead, and of course that was the thing that gave it the additional kick. So much of it's it had an impact that nothing could ever have nowadays in the kind of media landscape that we got now. Obviously, there's no physical product. There's no going down to Woolworths and buying a copy, as absolutely everybody did, didn't they? Almost in the form of a charitable donation. And therefore, the whole nation was kind of just enjoying that ride, weren't they, for a week or two? Oh, look, it's going up a chance. Oh, what can it possibly do next?
Also, they felt involved because so many people bought it, and so many people bought 2 copies and kind of gave one away. And I can just remember it being on sale everywhere. I remember going down Berwick Street Market by Carnaby Street by the Smash Hits office and seeing copies of it on kind of clotheslines with clothes pegs holding on it. People had bought them, I think, and were selling them off their grocer's store for the same amount of money, or maybe less. I don't know. It was really exciting, actually.
Yeah.
And I think your point about the mass media is so true. The really key thing, to some extent, also I think was the tabloids, and I think that one of the key things was the participation of Boy George. I mean, there were a few big names. There was Sting, there was Paul Weller, there was George Michael. But I think without Boy George, I think it would have been a totally different thing, because you forget Boy George was a really big name, was a household name in the world of the newspapers. My mum knew who Boy George was. She hadn't the faintest idea who George Michael or Sting or Paul Weller were. He was huge. And the fact that he turned up and, did he just miss the flight, or did Bob ring him up and say, you absolutely have to be here, get on a Concorde and come?
Well, with Concorde, it was quick enough. It was almost like a cab, wasn't it? You could ring somebody in New York and say, I'm here. Everybody's here. You'd better be here.
Yeah, and you would
get on it.
The flight was 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 20 minutes or something. It was incredible, wasn't it?
I don't know, it was a bit longer than that, I think. But it was pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so in the film, the documentary, which is really interesting, he kind of appears, he makes an entrance, which is very much what George would really like, most of all. That's George's fantasy. That is, all my pop pals are all gathered, waiting for me to turn up.
Waiting for me.
The party can start.
I remember him arriving. I can remember it was just a terrific kind of. Yes, now we've started. Yes.
Now
we can begin. We're off.
That's a relief, Boy George.
A glass of brandy before he sang. He insisted on having a large glass of brandy before he did his line. Amazing.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I remember. You and I weren't allowed to watch that particular bit, was the idea of them doing the chorus first and having to come up and do the solo lines, and just what a terrifying thing that must have been, to be singing in front of all your peers who you never normally saw anyway, and also never met. That's the other thing. Those people didn't meet around that time. They're actually very independent units, all those bands, sitting there, crucifying each other in the press, and suddenly they're all thrown into a room together feeling terribly meek. And having to get up there and sing a line with everybody watching the other side of the glass, that must have been really difficult.
And also, as Geldof reminded me, they were singing dry at the time, so people were not hearing the backing track at all. So if you ever hear anybody doing a vocal where you can't hear the backing track, they all sound flat. They all sound terrible.
Yeah.
They all sound overwrought. It's just the way those things work. So, nowadays, I mean, loads of people do vocals. They insist absolutely everybody leaves the studio. It's almost like doing a nude scene in the movies or something like that. It's a closed set, isn't it? When people do vocals, whereas this wasn't in those days. So there they are performing their vocals in front of, as you say, their peers, and then a bunch of bored-looking technicians.
Like taking a penalty shootout, like taking a penalty with the whole team watching.
Yeah.
And also having to inject as much of your personality into what you're saying as possible, because you've only got 4 or 5 seconds. You've got to sound like Bono. When you hear the record, people go, well, that's Bono. Well, that's Paul Young. Well, that's, that's Boy George. Clearly, you've got to kind of stamp your identity on it. Really difficult. But, it's an extraordinary day. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's a film very much worth seeing. It's on Monday night, I think.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
We neglected to mention a couple of weeks ago the sad death of 2 former drummers of the Bee Gees. Colin Peterson, who was their drummer when they came to Britain in the mid-'60s. So New York Mining Disaster and all those first hits. He was the drummer. And the other one was Dennis Byron. And Dennis Byron, who was kind of a drummer in their disco period, even though in many senses they didn't need a drummer for the following reason. Dennis Byron was the original drummer for Amen Corner, who were the teenage sensation from Wales from the late 60s, Andy Fairweather and all that kind of stuff. And he was out of work in the early 70s, and he was sharing a flat with a guy who just played guitar with the Bee Gees. And he said, oh, they need a drummer. Come along and be the drummer. So he went to be the drummer. And when they were starting to record material for Saturday Night Fever and so forth, he had to go home to Wales because I think his grandmother had died.
Oh, for a funeral, wasn't it? Yes, I remember the story.
And so he wasn't available for the session, which was for Staying Alive. And so they decided what they were going to do is just take a loop of part of the drums from Night Fever. And then they were going to find some extraordinary Heath Robinson way of running this as a very crude tape loop. I think you hear stories about tape being stretched across the control room, wound around a chair, plastic chair, and the back of the tape heads. That's what ended up being Staying Alive, was a tape loop of Dennis Byron playing the drums and also
and in some senses sounding the death knell for the drumming industry.
Absolutely.
Sorry, mate, we've replaced you with this tiny box.
It's a strange little place to have in history, but it fascinates me, all that kind of stuff. Did you see also more recently that Vic Flick, memorably named Vic Flick?
Yeah.
Now everybody listening to this podcast knows Vic Flick's work. They can all close their eyes right now and hear it in their heads. Let's all try this, shall we? Because Vic Flick played the guitar on the James Bond theme, okay? The John Barry Orchestra and Vic Flick playing the lead. There you go. And, he was famous for the rest of his life, as a consequence of having done this. Obviously, having done loads of other things as well, because he was London's kind of top session guitarist slightly before Big Jim Sullivan and those other names came in. But I do think it's absolutely fascinating. The Vic Flick's contribution to the James Bond sound is such a powerful part of the James Bond brand. So you think about James Bond. How many years has it been now? 60 years or something like that.
Yeah, the first one was something like 64. It was Dr. No, wasn't it, anyway? It was the first one.
I think that was the first one, yes.
Yeah.
And now, I don't religiously follow James Bond films, but I'm kind of aware that even when they make them nowadays, and your James Bond, the actor will be different, and the production values will be different. It is extraordinary to think that you can keep an idea like James Bond going with loads of different James Bonds. That's pretty remarkable when you think about that.
But the one thing you can't change.
But right at the beginning of every film, you have a kind of pre-titles action sequence, don't you?
Yeah.
That seems to get longer and longer, and probably takes a bigger and bigger bite out of the film's budget. It always has to be the bit that people go home and say, well, it's amazing. It starts with, a volcano or whatever it is, the space shuttle. I don't know. It always has to be something absolutely sensational, the like of which you've never seen before. And there will be a crash and a bang and an explosion, and I don't know, parachutes will open or people will ski off mountains or God knows what. And then there'll be a pause. And then you'll hear ding, 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 ding. And that is to reassure you that what you're getting is the act you've known for all these years, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's just that. It could never be anything different, could it? No. That is the sound of Vic Flick's solo on the James Bond theme,
which I still find incredibly
reassurance that you're in for a hell of a ride. And they don't, nothing else in the production has that kind of fingerprint. Nothing else. No. The actors have changed. All the actors have changed. The stories have been, they're all just fantasies, invented by, 3 weeks ago by a bunch of writers. Nothing to do with original books or anything. The only line back to Sean Connery in 1964 is that That tune played by that guitarist.
That guitar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unplayed. And you immediately have a mental image of looking down the barrel of the gun, don't you? And the blood and the figure falling over. And I could just tell that also hearing that has a very powerful emotional thrill.
It does.
You connected back to your inner schoolboy.
It does.
When actually James Bond, when I was a kid, James Bond 1964, James Bond was a very exciting, very exotic, extraordinary, thrilling, terrifying,
oh God, yeah.
But I think what other films? I mean, what other?
Well, the Star Wars works in the same way. The actors change, and they can spend more and more money, and the kind of technology gets more sophisticated, and nothing looks quite as real. But in the end, it's John Williams conducting the orchestra, doing the Star Wars theme. It's the same thing with Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones, and it was. There were only three of them, but the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the Spaghetti Western. That sound, that tiny little signature, immediately threw you back to Clint Eastwood in a poncho chewing a cigar butt. Really, really powerful.
I think it's an extraordinary, advertisement for the power of music. Is the part that it still plays in those long-running franchises, and they've learned not to mess with it. Don't update it, don't try and do a disco remix of it or anything like that. No, make it sound like it sounded back then.
It's true, because everything else has changed, so you've got to have one constant, haven't you, around which it can revolve.
Yeah. Talking of things changing, have you seen the TV ad for Jaguar?
I have.
Or as the Americans call it, Jaguar. They always
Jaguar.
Jaguar.
It's the most extraordinary thing, isn't it? It's the most extraordinary collection of diverse, beautiful young people.
Well, they're not very beautiful,
They do nothing, but they kind of walk towards the camera on what appears to be a kind of sci-fi landscape. And if I remember rightly, Dave, it has 4 of those advertising shout lines, which are designed to get somebody our age really annoyed. It's a bit like when Lucozade had an advert out. Do you remember? And the thrust of it was "Obey your thirst." All about kind of taking control, And their 4 lines in the Jaguar ad are "Live vivid."
Oh my God!
That's the first one, isn't it? Delete ordinary.
Yeah.
That's colloquial, isn't it? We say that all the time. I should just delete ordinary, Dave. Break molds and copy nothing. And then it leads to, it's only 30 seconds long, and it leads to the shape of a car underneath a kind of tarpaulin or whatever that's obviously about to be revealed. So this whole ad, which is interesting in itself, is hooked around a car that we haven't seen yet.
No, absolutely.
That's a teaser.
Sure.
The car is not, I don't think it's coming out for a while.
I when I first saw it, I thought, well, it's good to see that Siobhan Sharp and her agency Perfect Curve are still working. Because
making good money.
We all thought after their work with the BBC on W1A or the Olympics on 2012, that would be the end of them. But no, clearly, they're still working. And it is quite interesting. I think I sent you that link to Rory Sutherland, the kind of marketing, advertising guru, who's very good. He's always really very good.
Fantastic.
And he was talking on the Spectator TV thing about it, and he's pointing out that it's a very curious time in the car industry, which I'd never really thought about this before. There is a crisis in the worldwide car industry. Even the Germans are feeling it. Nobody quite knows what to do about electric cars and so forth. And you've got Trump, who's been returned to the White House thanks to the direct patronage of Elon Musk, talking about tariffs. God knows what effect that would have on it. So nobody quite knows what to do in the car business. And he also made the point that in the world of the electric car, the kind of old values upon which cars used to be marketed, i.e. engineering, Vorsprung Dirk technique, all this kind of thing, they sort of don't matter anymore, you know what I mean? Because once it's a battery, it's kind of demystified, you know what I mean?
No, it used to be about engines, an 8-litre engine or whatever. Just beautiful things made of solid brass, All that's gone.
It's all that's
and he
gone.
made some really interesting points that I'd never taken on board. But firstly was the idea that in the car industry, people love the brands, but they don't buy the cars.
No,
so we all love the idea of Jaguars because in our heads we've got the E-Type, we've got the S-Type saloon, we've got those wonderful 60s images, that kind of Italian job kind of recollection.
Do you know which fictional character that we all know and love used to drive a Jag? And that's the important thing. They call it a Jag, not a Jaguar.
Yeah, Jag. Yeah.
Certainly not a Jaguar. It's a Jag. Arthur Daly used to drive a Jag.
He did.
There's always something fatally disreputable about a Jag. That
was exciting when the kind of that they became adopted by kind of working. There was a kind of upper class car, wasn't it? Adopted by the working class on the way up. That was absolutely brilliant. Roy Sutton described it as the Jag as being raffish.
Raffish, it is.
Really good.
It is. You always imagine Terry Thomas at the wheel or Leslie Phillips leaning out the driver's window to kind of leer at some popsy or whatever it is. It's always got that kind of tweedy string back gloves, you know what I mean, smoking a cigar at the wheel. It's always got those connotations with it. And I have to admit, cars do nothing for me. I'm not bothered about them at all. But one of the, if I was ever to buy a car as a brand indulgence, it would be a Jag. Actually.
It'd be a Jag, I'm sure.
I suppose it's older gentlemen.
The coolest thing in the world. Absolutely fantastic. And there's one other point that he made, Rory Sutherland. He said that no British people buy Rolls Royces anymore. I thought that was a really interesting point.
No, they don't.
It used to be the most archetypally British thing, wasn't it? Do you remember the cover of Peter Sellers' The Best of Sellers, where he's buttoning up the hood ornament of a Rolls Royce, and wearing a bowler hat, if I remember.
I believe John Lennon had a psychedelic
Rolls Royce. It just became the thing you automatically did when you became rich, and that was the way you shouted about your wealth. But now it's apparently foreigners. British people don't buy them. Interesting.
Where's China, I think? China was, although I think China's rather gone off a cliff recently in terms of sales of luxury cars. Anyway, the bigger point in moving away from cars is, Jag is what they call in the marketing industry a heritage brand, that it's connected with the past. And they've got the problem that they want to sell that to younger people, and therefore at its most extreme, they get Siobhan Sharp's Perfect Curving and make the kind of ad that you've described. And maybe it'll all be clear when they take the tarpaulin off that car, and we'll all suddenly go, "Oh God, that's terribly exciting."
I'm going to go electric.
Maybe not. But it's kind of the same thing in entertainment or in music or whatever. Do you make, say, I mean, the Rolling Stones are an extreme example because they're all, they're 80 in their 80s or whatever. But do you make a kind of venerable rock and roll brand more appealing by trying to reposition it for a younger audience? Or do you just wait for the younger audience to grow up and get to the point where they're like the elder brand? Do you know what I'm saying?
You might leave a terrifying gap in the middle where, the old lot have forsaken it, the young lot haven't picked up on it yet. But I take your point completely.
And it's so many of the hours that people spend talking about marketing in anything, it used to apply in the world of magazines. I'm sure it still does in the world of newspapers and the BBC. The BBC is a classic case of this, actually. What did the BBC spend 95% of their time doing? I will tell you, Mark, and I know this, not that I work in the BBC, but nobody who works for the BBC could possibly deny it. They spend 95% of their time thinking, how can we make this more appealing to young people? Yeah. That's what they do.
Which is exactly
there is
what
no indication. There is no indication that any of the moves they make to make it more appealing to young people ever have the slightest effect. Not ever. But it makes the people who do the job feel more justified.
Yeah, so
that's what they're doing.
At least we tried by trying to make the idea of radio appealing to 20-year-olds. How many 20-year-olds do you know
who literally do not listen to radio?
I know 20 who obviously don't even, well, they just wouldn't have a radio. Not that you need a radio to have a radio, but you know what I mean?
I think you got the point. I think the average 16-year-old would not know what a radio was.
What a radio was.
It wouldn't. Could they? You explain to me what a radio is, kind of what it does, and how you operate it. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it at all. So,
like getting a typewriter out of the attic and showing it to a 15-year-old, mesmerised. What? Really? You did that? It's noisy, isn't it? What if you make a mistake? At which point you whip out your little bottle of Tipex, now caked up after 30 years in a drawer. It's amazing.
But it's like, you can't soup up the typewriter to make it appeal to young people. All you can do is leave the typewriter as it is, and then in time, some young people will grow up and think, I quite fancy something that's more laborious and and less practical. It's the same thing. It's what happened with vinyl, isn't it?
Like vinyl, exactly.
Inconvenient.
Turntables are back.
Inconvenient, expensive, easy to damage. Oh, I'd like that. You know what I mean? Because it becomes different from
makes it more precious.
It's
I
true.
do think the amazing thing about vinyl, I was talking to somebody about it just yesterday, actually, trying, again, explain the concept of vinyl to a 20-year-old. The most extraordinary thing is that every time you play a vinyl record, you are, in fact, depreciating it.
Yes.
The friction of that needle in the groove is actually wearing it out. Not only are you paying all this money and having all this analog equipment, but every time you play it, you're destroying it.
Yeah, well, luckily they don't play it. Most people buy records have no means to play them at all. But the kind of appeal of inconvenience really struck me. I think I told you this when we were on holiday 6 months ago.
Yeah,
with friends in France, and their son brought along a coffee machine. He brought from the UK a coffee machine big enough to kind of occupy most of the counter on a sandwich bar in Soho, just in order to take more trouble over making coffee every morning. So convenience goes in and out of style, doesn't it?
Well, it is. But also people are so hooked into particular habits that they can't function without particular types of coffee.
Yeah. Yeah.
My sister will only drink a certain type of Brazilian smoked coffee bean, and it has to be brewed at 89 degrees. She has a thermometer to check that. I love this about it. It has to be hand ground, and then it has to be done at 89 degrees. That's the optimum amount for bringing out the flavour. So there you go. But Dave, talking about gramophone records,
go on.
Can I plug, if you're not going to do it, can I plug your new compilation?
Oh, you can, yeah.
Because you've got a new well, you had one out, what was it, last year, the year before? You had a fantastic one, the one about the deeper cuts of the 70s. So tell us about this new one, which is a kind of volume 2, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, they were so pleased with the first one. They said, let's do another one. And that was a couple of years ago. I think the first one was called Deep 70s.
Deep 70s.
And this is a kind of continuation of the same theme. And I have to say that as kind of as dream fulfillments go for kind of people who spent most of their lives thinking about pop records, this takes some beating because basically I do it with Demon, and normally when a record company asks you to do a compilation, and it has happened on occasions in the past, normally you're hamstrung by compromises that you have to make. You've got to include so and so, and you've got to have. I don't know. Yeah. You got to have Freebird, or got to have this, got to have that. This is nothing like that at all. They simply say, just choose anything from the 70s. Ideally, it should be stuff that people don't really know. or they've maybe forgotten, or it's lesser known works by artists you do know,
well-known people,
or well-known songs by people you've never heard of, or whatever. And that to me was just absolutely perfect. And listen, there are always certain compromises involved in these things. But I have to say that I've done 2 of these with Demon. There's been barely any compromises at all. Only the odd thing they couldn't get, just couldn't trace the copyright holder or whatever. And they really did try.
It's fantastic. The first one is just cover versions, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what they like is the 4 CDs. They like them to have
themed
inner themes, so they're not just, a jumble of stuff. And so the first one is cover versions. I think it's called
Devo doing Satisfaction. Got Nina Simone's Baltimore, one of my absolute all-time favourite tracks.
It's got Niels
Elvis Costello doing Psycho.
Yeah, Niels Lofgren's version of Carole King's Going Back. Got the Ramones doing Let's Dance, I think. I can't remember. I haven't got it in front of me. But it's, it's very playable. And then the
Skinny Time music. White Twilly Band. Sniffing the Tears, Driver's Seat.
Yeah.
I'm excited because you and I had a conversation about this when you started working on it, and I chucked in a few ideas. And some ideas, which you would have thought of anyway, finished up on it. And one of them was Sniffing the Tears, Driver's Seat.
Right.
Grimm totally disappeared.
Yeah.
And then there's Americana, I think.
Americana, which is a kind of
Waiting for a Train.
Yeah, which gave me the excuse to use. It's a wide range of stuff that's kind of connected with America.
Yeah, you got Muddy Waters in there, Tarzan, Jimmy Webb.
And is Swamp Dog on there? No, Swamp Dog's on the 4th one. And then the fourth one is stuff that appears on the Island label in the 1970s, which is a really remarkably wide range of stuff. So you go from the Albion Band doing I can't remember what it is, and then Swamp Dog doing. Yeah. Did I say away too long, or did I come back too soon?
Ultravox and Sparks and Burning Spear. Yeah. Amazing. In fact, we're going to talk to Neil Story, aren't we, next week? I think
we are.
Produced this fantastic. It's a second volume of his books about the record sleeves, the Island Book of Records, the record sleeves, and the records that Island put out, and how beautiful they are. That'll be fun. It'll be very good.
Yeah. And this second volume is only 1969 to 70. I think I'm saying. My God, that was a year full of.
It's absolutely my
activity.
Prime time. It's just wonderful.
Fantastic.
It's all Fairport and Jethro Tull, and Traffic. It's brilliant.
Yeah. So we're talking to them in the next week. Who have we been talking to in the last week, Mark? We talked to Toyah and Robert Fripp.
Were fantastic. We were talking about their wonderful lockdown Sunday lunch clips that happened 4 years ago, which everyone was watching, and they've kind of evolved into a Christmas show. They're doing a Christmas party with a kind of full 7-piece band, playing all sorts of old 70s covers, which I would imagine would be very, very good. And we did John Lydon. I talked to John Lydon, who's terrific, talking about spoken word. He's doing the spoken word tour, and he was talking about. It's quite interesting because normally we talk about people, which bands did you see and which musicians influenced you, made you want to be on stage. And he was talking about spoken word people. So he's talking about Tommy Cooper. He's talking about Frankie Howard. He's talking about Bob Monkhouse, people he saw when he was a kid, and how absolutely extraordinary they were. Now that's interesting, and just an interesting new insight into him too, I think.
Well, being reminded of this cornucopia of delights has no doubt got you thinking, I really should be doing my little bit to support this immensely valuable work. And there is a way you can do that. If you go to patreon.com/word in your ear, you can find out how you could be involved in the continuance of this valuable work of national importance. And one of the people who's done that in the past by being a Patreon supporter is Mike Sketch, who now joins us on the occasion of his birthday.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And our birthday guest this week is Mike Sketch. Hello, Mike.
Hello, David and Mark. My 4th word birthday. I feel very privileged to have made it that far. Thank you.
Well, we're very privileged to have you with us once again.
Happy birthday.
You spent the morning attempting to get Glastonbury tickets for your daughter, unsuccessfully so far, but I'm sure you'll succeed at some point.
You never know.
What is the log you wish to throw on the embers of the word in your ear fire this week, Mike?
So thank you for the opportunity, gents. Well, I've been reflecting on my 3 and a bit years, actually, word relationship. And I've come to the conclusion that it really is never too late to get into different artists and performances, because quite frankly, Mark, you've turned me on to Bob Dylan. When I started listening to you guys several years ago. And you know what? I never used to get Dylan. I tried him in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. It never really clicked. And then I guess probably with his most recent album.
Did you go? Did you see him?
Yeah, I did go and see him actually 3 days after my birthday last week. And I was captivated. And I was reflecting afterwards that, you know, I never used to get this guy. And now I really find it quite amazing.
There's a brilliant piece in one of the reviews I read, where it said that the applause that people usually reserve for a song that starts that they love, that in Dylan concerts they reserve for the moment in the song when they realise what song it is he's playing. He suddenly goes, Desolation Row. And everyone goes, okay.
There he's gone. Yeah. Do you know what? I used to hear you talking about the fact that nobody really knew what Dylan was up to or where he was going to go next, and thinking it can't be that bad. And then, of course, you're absolutely right, because when he does play some of the old ones, and there aren't that many. I mean, there's less than half the set is oldies.
It's all new stuff. It's all the stuff that's spoken word, isn't it?
Yeah, well, actually, I thought he was singing quite a bit when I saw him, and he's just finished off 3 nights at the Albert Hall, where he sang progressively more each night, I think, according to the reviews. But I suppose my point is, you know, and my question for you guys would be, who is it that you listen to now and appreciate, who perhaps you never used to get? Is there anybody? And I'd also like to know if you've got any Dylan stories, because you guys have met him and interviewed him, and I'd love to know what your favourite moment.
Oh, Dave's got a good Dylan story. I've got one, but Dave's got a great one. Do the interview, Dave.
Oh God, I've told this story so many times. I interviewed him in 1986, and it was the most terrifying interviewing experience of my life, because you can't get over the fact you're sitting in a room with Bob bloody Dylan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that excitement kind of outweighs everything else. And you're frantically lobbing questions at him in the hope that you're going to get a response. And a lot of the time, he just doesn't bite at all, you know. And so there was a pause in the interview, and the woman from the record company said to Bob Dylan, "How's it going?" He says, "I don't know, he keeps asking me questions." Which, of course, I now realise is a very profoundly wise thing to say, because the whole business of asking questions of somebody like Bob Dylan is just ridiculous. You know, I often say this when I do live events or whatever. I always say, all right, you all think if you were in a room with Bob Dylan, you'd know what to ask him. Go on, what would you ask him? Come on.
The same thing, which is, what does the gates of Eden mean? Or whatever. A, who cares? And B, he's not going to tell you anyway.
He's not going to tell you anyway.
He doesn't know himself. So
yeah, absolutely.
Whereas the best question is, what were you watching on the telly last night? And that might lead to some interesting revelation.
Yes, didn't somebody discover? Didn't it turn out that he was a long time watcher of Coronation Street, wasn't he? Didn't this come out? So. I think this came out. And the amazing thing about Bob Dylan is he's been there in plain sight for a long, long, long time. You know, people like me and Mark have been kind of observing him since we're 14 years old or whatever. And yet there are still whole areas of his life nobody knows anything about. It's only a few years ago that he sold that house in Scotland that he had for years with his brother, and used to go every year to Scotland for a week. Nobody knew that at all.
No one knew he did.
Which I think is just absolutely extraordinary. This is a man who got married to somebody and nobody knew for, 5 years or something like that?
How many kids he's got? We know nothing about him at all.
It's just absolutely, he's a masterclass in the maintenance of mystique, which must be connected with the fact that he doesn't respond to questions. Really, he doesn't suffer from that thing that most rock stars suffer from, is a desperate desire to over communicate about himself. He doesn't do that. He doesn't have that kind of vanity, I don't think.
Martin Scorsese made a documentary about him, which you've probably seen. And it started with an interview with Bob Dylan. So, he thinks, well, I'll interview Bob on the basis of that, we'll make the documentary. And he asked him all stuff, and Bob just made up all this utter fiction about his life. All about how he went to see Kiss in a club in 1971, and he saw their face paint, and he thought, I'm going to take that whole idea of the face mask and use it on the Rolling Thunder tour and all this. And because Scorsese then had a constructed documentary that backed up all this complete and utter fiction and had invented people that Dylan had invented, played by actors. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And it told you nothing about Dylan's life at all.
I think on a more practical level, he's also nailed, I think, for those of us in our 50s or older, the perfect gig as well. So I saw him in Nottingham. There was no support. The house lights went down at 7:30 p.m. sharp.
Good. Off stage at 9.
They all shuffled on. He played 17 songs in the same order that he plays them every night. He introduced his band. I think he forgot one of them, but he introduced the other 3 after various songs with just this is, Jim Keltner on the drums, and that was it. He then stood up at the end after every grain of sand, shuffled off to the left, stood looking at the crowd for about 45 seconds, and then he shuffled off. This was 9:20. The lights went down. Everybody stood in the dark for about another minute, thinking he might come back for an encore, which of course he didn't. And then the house lights came up and we all shuffled off. And I was home by 11 o'clock. Perfect. Now, I think that is the perfect gig.
Dream night out.
And he didn't say a word to anybody other than by the looks of it, Jim Keltner.
The key thing is you weren't disappointed.
No, I wasn't. And I guess I kind of built myself up to know what to expect. But I thought it was brilliant. And of course, no phones. So everybody was completely, attentive.
So they took your phones off you at the.
They put them in a pouch. They put them in a pouch, which then seals and you can't get into it.
But they give it back.
So you keep it with you.
You keep it with you, and then on the way out, you can just get it opened and drop the pouch off, and away you go. So,
that's the future, isn't it? That's a good thing.
Really good.
I didn't realise. So I would say even more exciting than seeing Bob Dylan is you've seen Jim Keltner.
Yes,
Jim Keltner, who God knows is one of the greatest drummers ever walked the planet.
Well, Bob did introduce him actually as the great Jim Keltner.
Absolutely no shadow of a doubt about it at all. Absolutely. God, I haven't seen Jim Keltner for a long time. I saw him a load of times with Ry Cooder. I used to play with Ry Cooder. God, this wonderful drummer. Yeah, he's one of those people, if I see his name on the credits of an album, I will listen to the record.
Yeah.
And he had aviator shades on for the entire. And it was nearly dark on stuff. You couldn't see much. Yeah. I'm glad I was quite near the front because I think if I'd been at the back, it would have been literally 4 or 5 shadowy figures and nothing much else to see. Mark, do you have a story about him?
Well, it's not one with a hilarious punchline, but I think it just tells you something about Dylan. It's just about there was a time when he's being interviewed by I think it was a Rolling Stone journalist who was in a restaurant in Manhattan, and word got out that he was in there, and I think either a fellow diner or somebody who'd been outside and heard he was in came in, managed to get to the table, and managed to get Bob to sign an autograph. And the guy that was joining them for lunch came in and said, "I've just passed somebody outside selling your autograph." And Dylan wasn't. I was impressed about it. Dylan wasn't remotely upset about all that. He wasn't remotely surprised. He was just curious. And he said, "How much is he asking?" Because I thought that was really. I thought it told you a lot about him, really. Because in a way, you're just calibrating your own worth. Yeah. You're not upset that somebody signs an autograph and then tries to sell it minutes later. You just want to know, what am I worth these days?
I learned a story about Bob Dylan this week. And I found this on the internet. Oh God, what's the name of the guy that used to work as a producer on Jerry Seinfeld Larry, is it Larry Charles? I can't remember. Anyway, he's a well-known figure in TV writing and film writing or whatever, for a zany character. And he's contacted by Bob Dylan, who wants to write a sitcom. This must have been 20 years ago. The idea that Bob Dylan wants to write a sitcom. And so it's arranged that Larry will go and meet Bob to talk about it. Nearest place in Malibu. I think in Malibu. And I think he had a place for a while. There was a coffee shop. He owned a coffee shop. It's so Stella Street, you know. Yeah. And, so if you wanted to meet Bob Dylan, you went to the coffee shop to meet Bob Dylan. So Larry duly goes and is sitting there and talking to the woman behind the counter. He said, I'm here to meet Bob Dylan. She said, oh, he'll be out in a while. And so Bob Dylan eventually shuffles out from the back looking like Bob Dylan. He comes and sits next to him. And the waitress comes over and says, can I get you anything? And he goes, yeah, hell of a hot beverage. I feel like a hot beverage. This is so Bob Dylan. I feel like a hot beverage. What should I have? And he eventually decides he's going to have a hot chocolate or whatever. And then Larry, what does Larry want? I want an iced tea. Okay. Hot beverage, iced tea. Hot beverage, iced tea. And eventually the waitress comes out, places the hot beverage and the iced tea in front of the pair of them, and Bob Dylan reaches for the iced tea and drinks. That's Bob Dylan.
Oh, come on, Jim.
That's Bob Dylan. And then it's really, I'll have to find this link and send it to you, Mark. It's hilarious.
It does the opposite of what you expect.
They then develop the sitcom idea. And they go and have a meeting to pitch it at HBO or one of the big networks. And it's Bob Dylan, Larry, what's his name? Jeff Rosen, who's Bob Dylan's kind of lawyer, business manager, and an agent, I think. And they go into a high-level meeting at this network. Here's Bob Dylan. He wants to do a sitcom. They've got this mad idea that's never going to work in a million years. But anyway, they pitch it, and the network say, yeah, fine, okay, we'll sign you up for 7 or whatever. Then they go out into the elevator. They're waiting for the elevator, and Bob Dylan says, no, I don't feel like doing it anymore. That's Bob Dylan.
It's whatever he does. At the time when everyone was in such a state about the idea of music being used in adverts, that was the very moment that he allowed his music to be used for a Victoria's Secret.
Yes, absolutely. Didn't talk about that anymore.
The most opposite thing you can possibly do, the most confrontational and unexpected, and he does it.
Is what my mother used to call a contrary Mary.
I know.
And of course, now everybody's wondering, well, is that it, or is there anything else coming? You know,
everyone thought this was the last tour. They've been thinking that since, I don't know, mid-80s. So let's see. I think the last tour will just be him sitting down there, possibly with a piano player, and him just sitting next door in a seat with a microphone. He'll keep going. He's fantastic.
Well, it's never too late, folks, is it?
But to answer your question, for me, it was Howlin' Wolf and it was Duke Ellington, but also Tom Waits. I never got Tom Waits. Couldn't stand Tom Waits. Didn't understand him. It made no sense to me at all. And my eldest son got interested in him. We went up to see him in, I think it was about 2004. We went to see him in Edinburgh. I managed to get tickets. And from that moment, I was captivated. So Tom Waits has been the one I've
What I find is the older I get, the more I can see the appeal in really simple things that I couldn't see the appeal of when I was 15 and thought I was dead sophisticated. Yeah. So, Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby. That's my contribution. Well, it's been a very worthwhile log to throw in the fire, Mike. Thanks very much for doing that.
A lot of fun.
And
see you next birthday.
And go back to getting your Glastonbury tickets. See if you can do it.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.